touched one of the...
It was.
It was already on. It was already on. All right, beat me to it. Is that better?
The red button.
Now press the red button. Is that better?
Yes.
Right. Well, good morning. I also have a PowerPoint that hopefully will come up here. Thanks for the opportunity, of course, to participate in this discussion, and I'm going to give a kind of an overview of the Sacramento Valley, of course, and how it responds to drought, and of course how we can be thinking about as we go into dry conditions. Of course, Gary already touched on kind of what a drought is, and obviously we think a little bit about what exactly that means, but obviously when people start feeling a shortage of water is when they mentally start talking about drought, and I think that was maybe your point, Mr. Eisenberg. Let me just show a couple of graphs. This is the Sacramento Water Year Index for since 1906, more or less through the present, and for those who have a hard time seeing, the blue are the wet years, the yellow are the critical years, and you can kind of see that this has been this kind of the way the water years are scattered throughout the record. I think it just goes to show you how water managers have to plan, and of course there's a lot of folks that think that with some of the climate change scenarios that we're looking at, that these are only going to get sharper. This is now sorted through that same period, and you can see again the yellow on the left are the critical years, the blue on the right are the wet years, and it just kind of gives you the distribution across the year types. But you can see that as water managers, you have to prepare for a whole variety of water scenarios. So let me do a quick flyover of what has happened in the Sacramento Valley. Obviously 76, 77 is an instructive drought because it was very short, but obviously very intense. And there were reduced flows throughout the Sacramento Valley. Some districts in the Sacramento Valley had zero supplies. Of course, in the Sacramento Valley, we have a relationship with the Bureau of Reclamation in a couple of different formats. The water service contracts were reduced to 25% that year, and the settlement contracts were reduced as well. And the folks that have a relationship with the state project were also reduced to 50% during those years. Fast forward, of course, to the longer, but not quite as extreme drought in 88, 92. You had a similar dynamic where the water service contracts were cut to 25%. The other contracts, the settlement contracts, were all reduced in their respective capacities. And then there were certain districts that were reduced pretty significantly. And of course, many folks remember that was about the time that we started to have the Endangered Species Act emerge on the scene in California water, and there were a couple of injunctions prohibiting the diversion of water in the Sacramento Valley during that time, which of course has spawned a whole series of fishery-related programs that we're all pretty proud of. Yet a lot more work to be doing. 2007, 2009, again, water service contracts were at 40%. Obviously, the governor got involved largely because of the challenges down in the San Joaquin Valley, and of course, folks responded in the Sacramento Valley to help in that regard. So what, in simplistic forms, of course, several folks have suggested it all depends on the particular entity, the district, the area, but as a general rule, during drought conditions in the Sacramento Valley, when there is a reduction in surface water supply, at least in those areas where there is groundwater access, there is groundwater pumping that obviously takes place, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. There are neighbor-to-neighbor water transfers where folks move water around within a particular area to help each other. And then there's the internal management that can happen on a somewhat limited basis, but the recycling, all of the reoperation, remanagement within districts. And then there is obviously crop shifting and idling as one of the responses as well. In the Sacramento Valley, of course, we're also very cognizant to the pressures outside of the region, and of course this shows the larger water picture in California and the challenges that you've already heard about from I
can read neither the print nor see the colors with the words. Tell me what you're showing.
It basically says that there's lots of other parts of the state that want water. Okay. And in the Sacramento Valley, obviously, with the cornerstone projects, the state and federal projects, the Sacramento Valley has a role in that. And because of that, obviously, that is when you look at different opportunities to reoperate, and water transfers are obviously one flexible way to help meet the kind of the flexibility and the supply demands in other parts of the state. And of course, that can include this year, for example, folks on the Sacramento River looking at some reoperation opportunities to flatten flows, for example, during the fall, to provide some additional water and storage for a variety of benefits. So I think it's safe to say that folks folks are very interested in pursuing this. One of the things that we have challenged Gary and some of the folks at DWR is, of course, managing the expectations here, because sometimes I think there's this feeling that there's all this water available in the Sacramento Valley to solve the rest of the problems in the state, and that, of course, is simply not the case. With that said, there are some opportunities. And, of course, the governor earlier this year issued the executive order to help facilitate transfers. In the Sac Valley, of course, the managers are really actively managing water for a variety of beneficial purposes, and I think you all know this, but of course that includes the farms, the cities, the fish, the wetlands. It's all integrated very much in the Sacramento Valley, and all of these are important purposes. And during dry years, it's really the challenge that we have is to try to be able to provide water to all of these purposes. And it's this sustainability that I think has really been the focus of the water managers in the region. And a lot of that, of course, has been leading up to the drought. You don't wait till the drought and then do this. A lot of this, of course, has been done in advance of the drought to try to prepare. As far as the active water management, obviously Gary talked about the drought contingency plan. We have a water management task force that has been tackling this issue for several years, really looking at sustainability, again knowing that water managers have to plan for drought well in advance of the drought, and there's a lot of good work that has been done in the region that we'll talk about. And then, of course, we had an aggressive drought preparation workshop in January of this year, where we convened the leaders in the region to come together to really start looking at how are we going to be responding to another dry situation. So I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts. Obviously, there's a lot of details I would love to go into at the right time, but in light of the time, let me leave with four kind of quick thoughts. First is California does have a system, obviously, to deal with water allocation. The State Water Board notice that went out in July, we laud the State Water Board in their efforts in sending that out, and I give the Water Board a lot of credit in that regard. I think that they struck not only a good tone, but I think they also struck the right words in a lot of that notice, and I think that was really helpful, and I think those are the kind of things that I think are very helpful as we go forward. But there is a system in place, and I think we just need to all work together to make that system work. Active water management, again, I look at the groundwater situation in the Sacramento Valley. Obviously, as groundwater demands increase during a dry period, it's really the efforts that have gone on over the last some years to make more groundwater available that is really key. I think it gets lost sometime, but there are certain areas in the Sacramento Valley that were overdrafted 20 years ago, and because of conjunctive management, because of surface water, those areas are now very sustainable with respect to groundwater. And as you start going into this dry cycle, there is access to that groundwater in a sustainable fashion because of those efforts. So the water managers obviously spent a lot of time making all of those efforts well in advance of the drought, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Obviously, the surface storage, let me pick up on the theme that I think both Mr. Natoli and Fiorini kind of picked on earlier. Let me emphasize, I think the value of surface storage is something that we are not talking enough about. That value of surface storage, of course, is important for the cold water pool. It's important for the farms, the cities, go down your whole suite of purposes, recreation, all the things that people care about in California. And right now it feels to me like there's certain efforts in California that are trying to actually undermine the ability to have surface storage during these critically dry periods. I think we should be going the other direction and thinking a lot more creatively to have that surface storage, as well as, of course, making sure that that surface storage is being able to bank in underground and other places as we can throughout the wetter years. And then collaboration, Jason touched on that. Obviously, it sounds a little bit trite, but let's face it, that's how we get through these situations. And I know in the Sacramento Valley, I think we've had a long record of collaborating with folks throughout the state to help make these dry situations work for folks. So anyway, thank you, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Ms.